In late February, the eruption of the U.S.-Iran conflict triggered the indefinite closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That shutdown led to a sudden, hard stop to a massive volume of regional oil exports. Almost overnight, Gulf oil production fell by 14.4 million barrels per day compared to pre-war levels. Looking at this map of the Gulf region, we can see that even after accounting for alternative export routes utilized by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the net global supply loss still totals 12.8 million barrels every single day. Nations heavily dependent on the strait for transit, such as Iraq and Kuwait, were completely cut off from shipping any volumes at all. A choke point closure of this magnitude breaks the mathematical balance of global energy supply. You simply cannot remove nearly 13 million daily barrels without immediate downstream effects. We see those downstream effects clearly in India, where national crude imports have dropped from 5 million barrels per day down to roughly 4.5 million over the last 2.5 months. Despite this daily shortfall of 500,000 barrels, domestic refiners have continued operating at steady processing levels. To maintain their output, refiners are bridging the import deficit by aggressively drawing down their existing domestic stockpiles. They have shifted their supply chain strategy. Instead of relying on a continuous matching flow of imports, they are eating into a finite volumetric buffer. Because that buffer is finite, tracking its depletion rate provides a strict timeline for when the next major market crisis will hit. We can contextualize the speed of this drawdown by looking at spring reporting from the International Energy Agency. This chart visualizes that macro data. On the left side, global inventories collapsed by 129 million barrels in March and dropped by another 117 million barrels in April. When we shift to the right side of the chart to look at regional data from the commodities analytics firm Kepler, the local picture mirrors the global drop. Since February, India's crude stockpile has seen a rapid 15% depletion, falling from 107 million barrels down to 91 million. Yet, as steep as that 15% curve looks, it is actually being artificially flattened by a recent operational anomaly. In April, Nayara Energy initiated maintenance work at its 400,000 barrel per day refinery in Gujarat, which temporarily removed a massive chunk of demand from the system. If that scheduled downtime hadn't suppressed national consumption, the drain on domestic inventories would be significantly deeper today. Understanding exactly how much oil is left requires navigating a critical discrepancy between independent analytics and official government reporting. This ledger breaks down Kepler's calculations. They take that 91 million barrels of static inventory and divide it by India's daily consumption of roughly 5 million barrels. That math reveals current inventories are sufficient for nearly 18 days of demand, a razor-thin margin for national energy security. However, the Indian government asserts a drastically different figure, stating existing crude reserves are enough to cover 60 days of national consumption. The gap between 18 days and 60 days comes down to methodology. Kepler is measuring static volume inside commercial storage, refineries, and strategic petroleum reserves. The government includes dynamic, moving variables. Specifically, the government calculates crude currently flowing through pipelines, as well as cargoes already loaded on ships headed to India as part of their stockpile. The government's 60-day figure represents total systemic volume, including oil that hasn't arrived yet. Kepler's 18-day metric reflects the immediately accessible on-site operational buffer. Relying on in-transit sea cargoes to pad national reserve estimates introduces a severe vulnerability. Ocean transit routes operate like an extended, moving pipeline. For the pressure in that pipeline to remain stable, it requires a constant, uninterrupted flow of new ships entering the network. But the indefinite closure of the Strait of Hormuz is acting as a physical block, preventing new ships from entering this maritime conveyor belt. Heavily dependent producers like Iraq and Kuwait cannot physically load new cargoes into the water to replace the ones currently arriving in India. Once this specific, existing convoy of ships finishes docking and unloading, the dynamic supply replacement rate drops to zero. Warning tone. Relying on in-transit cargo merely delays the impact. When the ocean pipeline runs dry, the 60-day systemic buffer will quickly give way to Kepler's 18-day reality. This chart projects that 15% depletion trend line forward into the near term. If we overlay the impending variable of the peak summer demand season, the consumption curve accelerates directly into the shrinking stockpiles. The math here is inflexible. Refineries cannot indefinitely sustain 5 million barrels of daily processing on only 4.5 million barrels of daily imports. As the domestic buffer hits critical minimums, refineries will be forced to execute severe run cuts, officially lowering their processing rates to match the restricted imports. That forced throughput reduction is the exact moment the geopolitical shock breaks domestic operational stability. And this localized production cut in India feeds directly back into the broader macroeconomic crisis. The IEA has already warned that the global market's volumetric shock absorbers are shrinking at a record pace. When peak summer fuel demand collides with a starved, heavily restricted supply chain, the pressure in the system spikes. Without sufficient inventory buffers to absorb that impact, the bottleneck will trigger immediate, severe price volatility across all global energy markets. The current price stability at the pump is an illusion funded by drained tanks and borrowed time. The true economic cost of the Hormuz closure is already on the horizon.